FBI agent Nyala Ashanti had spent 2 years hunting Korean mafia boss Jihan Yeo, the untouchable criminal mastermind who ran operations across 3 continents. But when her cover was blown and he offered an impossible deal, she found herself standing in the gilded Korean embassy chapel, about to do the unthinkable. Nyala's hands trembled as she clasped the handcuffs around Jihan's wrists, their faces inches apart. The officiant's voice echoed, "I now pronounce you husband and wife." This was the plan. Marry him for diplomatic immunity, so he'd testify against his own empire. But as Jihan's dark eyes burned into hers, a dangerous smile curved his lips. "Clever, Agent Ashanti. But this cage you've locked us in, it works both ways." Her breath caught. She'd just married the man she was supposed to destroy, and suddenly, she wasn't sure who had trapped whom. Chapter 1. The Korean embassy chapel glittered with gold leaf and silk banners that caught afternoon light through stained glass windows. Nyala had envisioned this moment countless times during her 2-year investigation. The takedown, the arrest, the triumph. Never once had she imagined herself in a cream dress, standing at an altar while diplomatic officials witnessed her vows to Jihan Yeo. The handcuffs gleamed between them, chrome against the expensive fabric of his charcoal suit. She'd insisted on them despite protests from her superiors. If she was going through with this insanity, she would at least maintain the pretense of control. Jihan's thumbs traced small circles against her palms, where their hands met around the cuffs. The touch sent electricity up her arms that she refused to acknowledge. His voice was low enough that only she could hear beneath the officiant's droning. "You should have worn traditional colors. Red would suit you." "You don't get to have opinions about my wardrobe?" She kept her own voice barely above a whisper, conscious of the 6 FBI agents positioned around the chapel's perimeter and the Korean diplomatic staff observing from carved pews. "I get to have opinions about my wife's wardrobe." The word wife rolled off his tongue with amusement that made her jaw tighten. "Traditional Kenyan ceremonies are more colorful, aren't they? Your grandmother would be disappointed in this sterile affair." Nyala's fingers twitched against the handcuffs. "Don't talk about my grandmother." "Why not? She sounds remarkable from what I've learned. The woman who raised you in Nairobi after your parents moved to the States. The one who told you stories about marrying dangerous men and finding freedom in impossible places." His dark eyes held hers with unnerving intensity. "She prophesied this, didn't she?" The officiant cleared his throat, clearly waiting for their attention to return to the ceremony. Nyala forced herself to breathe normally, though her pulse hammered against her throat. How did Jihan know about her grandmother's prophecies? How much had he researched her life while she'd been investigating his? "The rings," the officiant prompted. A diplomatic aide stepped forward with a velvet cushion bearing 2 platinum bands. The absurdity of the moment pressed down on Nyala like physical weight. She was exchanging rings with a man whose organization she'd spent 26 months trying to dismantle. A man whose intelligence network spanned 3 continents and whose legitimate businesses masked sophisticated criminal operations that her agency barely understood. Jihan lifted one cuffed hand, forcing hers to rise with it, and took the smaller ring between his fingers. His eyes never left hers as he spoke the words the officiant fed him. "With this ring, I thee wed." When he slid the cool metal onto her finger, his thumb lingered against her knuckle. The touch lasted 2 seconds too long. Deliberate. Everything Jihan did was deliberate. Nyala reached for the second ring with hands that had stopped trembling. She'd made harder decisions in her career. She'd gone undercover in trafficking rings, posed as a buyer in arms deals, walked into rooms where one wrong word would have meant her death. This was just another operation, another role to play. Except the ring sliding onto Jihan's finger felt nothing like playing a role. It felt permanent in a way that turned her stomach. "I now pronounce you husband and wife." The officiant's smile was professionally warm, as though he performed shotgun diplomatic marriages every week. "You may kiss the bride." Nyala's breath stopped. They hadn't discussed this part. The negotiation with the FBI director, the frantic consultation with the State Department, the diplomatic immunity paperwork. None of it had covered the kiss. Jihan's smile widened as he registered her momentary panic. Still cuffed together, he raised their joined hands to cup her face. The position forced her to step closer, until the handcuffs pressed between them, and she could feel his breath warm against her lips. "We should make it convincing," he murmured. "Your colleagues are watching. One step out of line. I know. You'll shoot me yourself. You made that clear during negotiations." His thumb traced her cheekbone with unexpected gentleness. "But right now, Agent Ashanti, we're married, and married people kiss." He closed the distance before she could formulate another threat. His lips met hers with practiced confidence, the kind that came from a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. The kiss lasted exactly long enough to satisfy diplomatic protocol, and not 1 second more, but Nyala felt its impact down to her toes. When he pulled back, his eyes held something that looked dangerously close to satisfaction. Applause echoed through the chapel, sparse, professional, deeply uncomfortable. Nyala turned to face their audience and caught sight of director Callista Verne standing near the entrance. The director's expression revealed nothing, but Nyala knew her mentor well enough to read the tension in her shoulders. This operation had been approved under extreme duress, with the understanding that one misstep would end Nyala's career, along with any chance at justice. The receiving line blurred past in a haze of congratulations that felt surreal. Korean diplomats bowed with formal grace. FBI agents shook her hand with expressions that ranged from concerned to openly skeptical. Through it all, Jihan remained connected to her by the handcuffs, his presence a constant reminder of how thoroughly she'd entangled herself. "The car is ready." Agent Marcus Webb appeared at her elbow, his weathered face carefully neutral. He'd been her handler throughout the investigation, the one person besides the director who knew every detail of her infiltration. Now he looked at her as though she were a stranger. "We need to move you both to the safehouse." "Already eager to lock us away together?" Jihan's tone was light, conversational. "I'm touched by the FBI's commitment to our honeymoon arrangements. The only thing being arranged is your protective custody pending trial testimony." Webb's hand moved to his service weapon, in a gesture Nyala recognized as pure intimidation. Any other interpretation would be a mistake. "Marcus!" Nyala's voice carried enough warning to make her former handler's eyes snap to hers. "We're clear on the arrangement. Let's move." The drive through Washington, D.C.'s diplomatic district happened in silence, broken only by the crackle of radio chatter from the escort vehicles. Nyala sat pressed against the far door of the black SUV, maintaining as much distance as the handcuffs allowed. Jihan seemed perfectly comfortable, his posture relaxed despite the chrome restraints and the armed agents filling the vehicle. "You're thinking very loudly." He turned his head toward her, that infuriating smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Second thoughts?" "I don't have second thoughts. I make decisions and follow through." "Admirable. It's one of the things I've always appreciated about you." The way he said "always" made it sound as though they'd known each other for years, rather than the few tense negotiations that preceded this nightmare. "From the moment I first saw your photograph in my security files, I knew you were different, more committed, more dangerous." Nyala's training screamed at her not to engage, but curiosity won. "When was that?" 3 years ago. You were working a trafficking case in Seattle, coordinating with local authorities to bust a ring bringing in workers from Southeast Asia. My security team flagged you because you were getting close to some of my business associates." He shifted, the movement pulling their joined wrists closer together. I started following your career after that. Every case you closed, every promotion you earned, you're remarkably good at what you do, Agent Ashanti. Stalking your opposition. How flattering. Not opposition, obsession. He said it so casually, as though admitting to stalking a federal agent was perfectly reasonable dinner conversation. I wanted to understand the woman who dedicated her entire life to destroying men like me. What drives that kind of single-minded purpose? What pain fuels that particular fire? The SUV turned through security gates that closed behind them with mechanical precision. The safehouse materialized through bulletproof windows, a modernist structure hidden behind mature trees, all clean lines and reflective glass that prevented anyone from seeing inside. It looked more like a tech executive's retreat than a protective custody facility. We've swept the interior twice in the past 6 hours. Webb climbed out first, hand still near his weapon. Perimeter security is active. You'll have 2 agents on rotation outside, additional surveillance monitoring all approaches. How romantic. Jihan followed, Nyala from the vehicle with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to moving in restraints. Nothing says happily ever after quite like armed guards and motion sensors. Inside, the safehouse was as impersonal as its exterior promised. Expensive furniture arranged without warmth, abstract art chosen by committee, floor-to-ceiling windows that revealed a manicured lawn surrounded by privacy fencing. Someone had stocked the kitchen with basics. Someone else had left files on the dining table, evidence compilations Jihan would review for his upcoming testimony. Webb pulled Nyala aside while other agents conducted a final sweep. Director Verne wants a briefing call in 2 hours. Until then, you're to establish protocols and maintain constant visual confirmation of the asset. Stop calling him an asset. He has a name. He's a criminal who orchestrated this entire situation to serve his own purposes. Webb's voice dropped low enough that Jihan wouldn't hear from across the room where another agent was explaining security protocols. Don't forget that, Nyala. Whatever he says, whatever he does, this is manipulation. It's what men like him do. I'm aware. Are you? Because you just married him. Put a ring on your finger and took vows that have legal weight, even if they're part of an operation. That changes things. Nyala met her handler's eyes steadily. It changes nothing except the parameters of his immunity. I know the mission. I know the risks. Webb looked like he wanted to argue further, but another agent called him away to verify security camera placement. Nyala turned back to find Jihan watching her from beside the windows, his expression unreadable in the late afternoon light. Trouble in paradise already? He raised their cuffed wrists in a mock toast. Your colleagues don't approve of our union. My colleagues don't need to approve. They need to do their jobs. And your job now is to babysit me until trial. How did the mighty hunter end up as a glorified prison guard? He moved closer, forcing her to track him across the open floor plan. You should be leading task forces, Nyala, breaking trafficking rings and bringing down cartels. Instead, you're chained to me in a suburban prison pretending to be married. I am married, legally, which means you don't get to use my first name. We're well past formalities, don't you think? He stopped close enough that she caught the scent of his cologne, something expensive with notes of cedar and smoke. You've spent 2 years learning everything about me. You know my business partners, my security protocols, my favorite restaurants. You know I take my coffee black, that I'm allergic to shellfish, that I learned Swahili from my mother who grew up in Mombasa before moving to Seoul. His voice softened. And I know you, Agent Ashanti. I know you run 6 miles every morning to quiet the thoughts in your head. I know you still wear your sister's bracelet despite agency regulations against jewelry. I know you haven't spoken to your father in 4 years because he thought you should grieve instead of hunt. Nyala's free hand moved instinctively to her wrist, where the thin silver chain rested beneath her sleeve. Don't. Don't what? Acknowledge that we've been circling each other for years? That this wedding was inevitable? He lifted their joined wrists between them. These handcuffs don't just bind me, Nyala. They bind us both. And before this is over, you're going to have to decide which one of us is really the prisoner. The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Outside, the sun dropped toward the horizon, painting the white walls in shades of gold that matched the chapel where they'd spoken their vows. Nyala's phone buzzed with an incoming message. Director Vern, no doubt, preparing for the briefing call that would determine whether this insane operation continued or collapsed under the weight of its own impossibility. But for this moment, in the fading light of their first day as husband and wife, all Nyala could focus on was the way Jihan's thumb had resumed those small circles against her palm, and the terrible realization that part of her didn't want him to stop. Chapter 2. The first night in the safehouse stretched longer than any stakeout Nyala had endured. She'd established ground rules within an hour of Webb's departure. Separate sleeping areas, no unnecessary physical contact beyond what the handcuffs required, and absolutely no discussion of anything personal. Jihan had agreed with the kind of easy compliance that set her nerves on edge. Now, 3 hours past midnight, she lay in the master bedroom staring at ceiling shadows while Jihan's breathing stayed frustratingly, even from the chair she'd positioned beside the bed. The handcuffs meant they couldn't separate beyond arm's length. She'd debated securing him to the bed frame, but that felt too much like acknowledging the intimacy of the situation. "You're still awake." His voice cut through the darkness without preamble. "I can hear your breathing pattern change when you're thinking. Go to sleep." Difficult, given the chair situation, but I suppose comfort isn't a priority for prisoners. Nyala rolled onto her side, the movement pulling the cuffs taut between them. In the ambient light from security systems outside, she could make out his silhouette, head tilted back, apparently relaxed despite the situation. "You chose this arrangement. The marriage, the immunity deal, all of it. Don't complain about accommodations now." "I'm not complaining, merely observing that my wife seems determined to torture both of us out of principle." The chair creaked as he shifted. "There's a perfectly functional second bedroom, or we could both be adults and share the bed with appropriate boundaries." "Not happening. Because you don't trust me, or because you don't trust yourself?" The question landed with surgical precision. Nyala sat up sharply, the handcuffs forcing Jihan forward in his chair. "Let's establish something right now. Whatever game you think you're playing, the flirtation, the personal observations, the implied intimacy, it's not going to work. I'm not some mark you can manipulate with charm and psychological warfare." Jihan's smile was visible even in darkness. "Who said anything about games? I'm simply trying to survive our forced proximity with a modicum of grace. Unlike you, I'm not interested in making both of us miserable to prove a point." "The point is that you're a criminal awaiting trial. The point is that we're legally married and handcuffed together in a luxury prison. We can spend the next 3 months torturing each other, or we can attempt basic civility." He leaned forward until their faces were only inches apart. "Your choice, Nyala. But choose quickly, because neither of us is sleeping with this level of tension." She wanted to argue. Every instinct honed through years of training insisted that showing any softness to Jihan Yeo would be a tactical error. But exhaustion was already dulling her edges, and the rational part of her brain acknowledged his point. They were trapped together until the trial concluded. Fighting, every minute, would destroy them both. "Fine, you can sleep on top of the covers. No touching, no talking, no romance. Perish the thought." His tone carried amusement that should have irritated her more than it did. "I'll be a perfect gentleman. Cross my heart." The shift from chair to bed required awkward coordination that neither of them commented on. Jihan settled onto his back atop the duvet, their cuffed wrists resting in the space between their bodies. The king-sized mattress felt impossibly small with another person on it, especially one whose presence seemed to fill every inch of available air. Nyala closed her eyes and focused on breathing techniques designed to lower heart rate and induce sleep. She made it through 3 cycles before Jihan spoke again. Your sister was 16 when she died. Every muscle in Nyala's body went rigid. I told you not to talk about personal matters. You did. But we're lying in darkness with nothing but thoughts to keep us company. And I'd rather discuss real things than pretend we're strangers. He paused, and when he continued, his voice had lost its teasing edge. Wamboy. Her name meant singer of songs, and by all accounts she had a beautiful voice. She wanted to study music in Nairobi, but your parents had already moved to the States and were pressuring her to join them for better opportunities. Nyala's throat constricted around words that wouldn't form. She hadn't spoken Wamboy's name aloud in 3 years, not since the funeral where her father had accused her of choosing vengeance over healing. She got involved with a boyfriend your grandmother didn't approve of, Jihan continued. He gave her pills he claimed were safe, imported from Europe through family connections. She took them at a party. Her heart stopped before the ambulance arrived. The handcuffs shifted as he turned his head toward her. You were finishing your training at Quantico when it happened. By the time you made it home, they'd already prepared her body for burial. You never got to say goodbye. Stop. The word came out broken. You joined the trafficking task force 6 months later. Requested every case involving pharmaceutical smuggling. Worked overtime until your supervisors forced you into counseling. You became the FBI's most decorated agent under 30 because you turned grief into fuel. His fingers found hers in the darkness, threading through them with unexpected gentleness. I understand that drive, Nyala. I understand what it costs. She should pull her hand away, should remind him about boundaries and professional distance. Instead, she found her fingers tightening around his. You don't know anything about what it cost. Don't I? My parents were murdered in Nairobi when I was 12. Rivals who wanted my father's shipping business burned our house while we slept inside. My mother got me out through a 2nd-story window, then went back for my younger sister. The darkness seemed to press closer around his words. I waited in the garden for an hour while the house burned, listened to the screams, watched firefighters arrive too late to save anyone. Nyala's breath caught. His file mentioned his parents' death, but characterized it as a business dispute resolved through legal channels. Nothing about arson. Nothing about a sister. Her name was Minho. She was 8 years old and terrified of fires. Used to make me check under her bed for matches before she'd sleep. Jihan's voice stayed level, but his grip on Nyala's hand had become almost painful. I inherited my father's empire at 12 because there was no one else. His partners, his employees, his obligations, they all became mine, including the people who wanted him dead. So you became them. I became what was necessary to survive. By 15, I'd consolidated power. By 18, I'd expanded into territories my father never dreamed of. By 25, I was untouchable. He turned fully onto his side, the movement pulling her closer until they lay facing each other in the darkness. And through it all, I watched agents like you try to bring me down. Dedicated, brilliant people who believed the world was divided into heroes and villains, who thought justice was something you could achieve through arrests and trials. It is it? Then why did the men who killed my family walk free with diplomatic immunity? Why do corrupt officials prosper while agents like you risk everything for scraps of progress? His free hand came up to cup her face, thumb tracing her cheekbone with the same gentleness he'd shown at the altar. We're not so different, you and I. We both turned our pain into purpose. The only difference is which side of the law we chose. Nyala should move away, should reassert boundaries and professional distance. But his touch was doing strange things to her ability to think clearly, and his words had opened wounds she'd spent years carefully sealing. I chose justice, she whispered. You chose revenge. Maybe. Or maybe we both chose survival and called it different names. He shifted closer still, until their faces were mere inches apart, and she could feel his breath warm against her lips. Tell me honestly, Nyala, if you could go back to that night your sister died, if you could make the people responsible suffer the way you've suffered, would you choose justice? Or would you choose revenge? The question hovered between them like a live wire. Nyala's heart hammered against her ribs as she confronted the terrible honesty in his words. She'd spent 4 years telling herself that bringing down trafficking networks was about justice, about saving others from Wamboy's fate. But in the darkest hours of sleepless nights, she'd imagined finding the man who sold those pills and making him hurt the way her family had hurt. That's different, she managed, but the words sounded weak even to her own ears. Is it? Jihan's thumb traced her lower lip, the touch feather-light and devastating. Or are we both just broken people trying to make sense of a world that took everything we loved? She should shut this down, should remind him that shared trauma didn't erase the fact that he was a criminal, responsible for countless other broken families. But something in his eyes, pain so raw it matched her own, kept the words trapped behind her teeth. Your parents would be proud of who you became, she said instead, surprising herself with the gentleness in her voice. You survived. You built something from the ashes they left behind. And yours? Are they proud of you? The question landed like a physical blow. Nyala's father hadn't spoken to her in 4 years, not since she'd chosen the trafficking task force over therapy and family healing. Her mother sent occasional emails, carefully neutral updates about weather and neighbors, but never mentioned Wamboy, or acknowledged the hole her death had torn through their family. My grandmother would be proud, she said finally. She understood about purpose, about using pain as fuel instead of letting it consume you. The one who prophesied you'd marry a dangerous man? Jihan's smile returned, softer now. She sounds like someone I would have liked to meet. She passed away 2 years ago. Heart failure. Nyala's throat tightened around the words. I was undercover in Seoul when it happened. Couldn't make it back in time for her burial either. Seoul? His expression shifted to something she couldn't quite read. When in Seoul? October 2 years ago. Why? Jihan's laugh was quiet and slightly disbelieving. I was in Nairobi that month, visiting the old neighborhood where my parents died, paying respects at a shrine my mother's family maintains. His fingers found hers again, threading through them with deliberate care. We kept missing each other. All those years of circling closer, and we were never in the same city at the right time. Maybe that was for the best. Or maybe it was inevitable that we'd eventually end up here. Handcuffed together in the darkness, finally forced to stop running. He shifted closer still, eliminating the last inches of space between them until their bodies aligned from shoulders to knees. I'm glad it's you, Nyala. Of all the agents who could have brought me down, I'm glad it's you. The words should sound manipulative. Strategic. Another layer of psychological warfare designed to lower her defenses. But delivered in darkness with his thumb tracing gentle patterns on her wrist, they felt like something else entirely. They felt like truth. Nyala's training screamed warnings about Stockholm Syndrome and tactical seduction. Her instincts, honed through years of reading people in high-stakes situations, insisted that Jihan was playing an angle she hadn't identified yet. But her heart, the carefully guarded piece of herself she'd locked away after Wamboy's death, recognized something in him that matched her own brokenness. This doesn't change anything, she said, but even she could hear how the conviction had leaked from her voice. Come morning, you're still a criminal awaiting trial. I'm still the agent assigned to guard you. Of course. His lips curved against her forehead in what might have been a kiss, or might have been simple contact in darkness. But right now, in this moment, we're just 2 broken people who understand what the other has lost. That's enough. It should have been enough. Should have been everything. Instead, as Nyala's eyes finally drifted closed and exhaustion dragged her toward sleep, she couldn't shake the feeling that they'd just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. That morning would bring complications neither of them was prepared to handle. Jihan's breathing evened out beside her, his body warm against hers in the darkness. The handcuffs rested between them, no longer just restraints, but a physical reminder of how thoroughly they'd become entangled. And as sleep finally claimed her, Nyala's last conscious thought was that Marcus had been right. Everything had changed. Chapter 3. Morning arrived with brutal clarity. Nyala woke pressed against Jihan's chest, their bodies tangled together in ways that definitely violated every boundary she'd established. His arm curved around her waist, the handcuffs twisted so their joined wrists rested against her hip. In sleep, she'd sought his warmth like a lodestone finding north. She extracted herself with careful precision, hoping not to wake him. No such luck. His eyes opened as soon as she moved, dark and alert despite the early hour. "Good morning, wife." His voice carried amusement and something warmer that made her stomach flip. "Sleep well?" "Don't." She climbed from the bed with as much dignity as the situation allowed, which wasn't much given their connected wrists. "Last night was... we shouldn't have... talked? Formed a human connection? Committed the cardinal sin of seeing each other as actual people rather than adversaries?" He followed her up with fluid grace, moving to accommodate the handcuffs without complaint. "Which part are you regretting?" "All of it. None of it." Nyala's thoughts were a tangle she couldn't begin to unravel before coffee. "I need to shower. You'll have to..." "I'm aware. Handcuffs rather complicate personal hygiene." He gestured toward the master bathroom with their joined wrists. "After you, Agent Ashanti. I promise to be a gentleman about the situation." The shower arrangements proved exactly as awkward as anticipated. Nyala locked herself in the glass enclosure while Jihan waited outside, their cuffed hands creating a bizarre connection through the partially open door. She dressed in the FBI-provided clothes with record speed, hyper-aware of his presence just feet away. "Your turn," she said, exiting the bathroom still damp around the edges. "Make it quick." Jihan's shower took longer than hers, but true to his word, he maintained appropriate boundaries. When he emerged dressed in expensive casual wear that someone had stocked in the bedroom closet, his hair was still wet, and his expression had shifted into something more guarded than the previous night's vulnerability. The kitchen smelled like coffee. Someone had programmed the automatic pot to brew at dawn. Nyala poured 2 cups, while Jihan examined the FBI files spread across the dining table. The evidence was comprehensive. Shipping manifests, wire transfers, surveillance photographs documenting 3 years of criminal operations. "These are good," he said, flipping through pages with his free hand. "More comprehensive than I expected. Your team has been busy. It's enough to put away your entire operation for the next 30 years. If I testify," he looked up from the files, expression unreadable. "And if certain other parties don't kill me first." The doorbell chimed before Nyala could respond. A precise electronic sound that preceded Marcus Webb's arrival. Her handler entered carrying additional files and wearing an expression that suggested the morning briefing wouldn't be pleasant. "Director Verne wants a full status report." Webb's eyes cataloged every detail of the scene. Their proximity, the handcuffs, the way they'd unconsciously angled their bodies toward each other. "She has concerns about the operational parameters." "Concerns meaning what?" Nyala kept her voice level despite the implication. "Meaning diplomatic channels are already pressuring the State Department to invalidate the immunity agreement. Korean officials are claiming procedural violations." Webb dropped the new files onto the table with more force than necessary. "Which means our timeline just compressed. We need Jihan's testimony transcribed and verified within 72 hours, or this entire operation collapses." Jihan's expression remained carefully neutral, but Nyala felt tension coil through his body where their wrists connected. And if the immunity agreement collapses? Then you stand trial for everything in these files, and Agent Ashanti's career ends for conducting an unauthorized marriage ceremony that compromised an active investigation. Webb's tone left no room for argument. So I suggest you both stay focused on cooperation, rather than whatever happened last night. Nothing happened last night. The lie tasted bitter on Nyala's tongue, made worse by the way Jihan's eyes cut toward her, with something that looked like hurt. Good, keep it that way. Webb pulled out a recording device and set it on the table. We start testimony documentation in 1 hour. I'll be back with stenographers and additional security. Until then, I suggest you both review the evidence and prepare for detailed questioning. He left without waiting for acknowledgement, the door closing with quiet finality. In the silence that followed, Jihan returned his attention to the files, but his earlier ease had vanished behind professional distance. Jihan, no need to explain. His voice matched his expression, carefully empty. Last night was a tactical error on both sides, exhaustion and forced proximity creating false intimacy. I understand the game, Agent Ashanti. I've played it myself often enough. The words cut deeper than they should. Nyala told herself she should feel relieved that he was reinforcing professional boundaries. Instead, she felt something uncomfortably close to loss. They worked through the files in tense silence, their only communication the occasional need to shift positions or pass documents. When Webb returned with 2 stenographers and additional security personnel, the master bedroom felt more like an interrogation room than the intimate space where they'd shared their pain hours earlier. The testimony session lasted 6 brutal hours. Webb grilled Jihan on every detail of every transaction documented in the evidence files: dates, locations, names of associates, methods of operation. Jihan answered with clinical precision, his voice never wavering even when admitting to crimes that would destroy dozens of organizations and end careers across multiple countries. Nyala sat beside him throughout, their hands still joined by handcuffs, and watched him systematically dismantle the empire he'd built from his parents' ashes. He'd claimed last night that they weren't so different, both driven by trauma, both building purpose from pain. But seeing him cooperate so thoroughly with their investigation, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something crucial about his motivations. Let's talk about the Korean diplomatic connections, Webb said, flipping to a new section of files. Your organization provided security for embassy functions across 3 continents. That level of access doesn't happen without official sanction. Something flickered behind Jihan's eyes. There and gone so fast, Nyala almost missed it. I provided services they required. What they chose to sanction wasn't my concern. But you had direct communication with diplomatic staff, protected their interests in exchange for immunity from local prosecution. Webb leaned forward, scenting blood. Give me names, Jihan. Everyone who provided cover for your operations. No. The single word landed like a gunshot. Webb's expression hardened into something dangerous. That wasn't a request. I'm aware. But there are limits to what I'll provide, Agent Webb. People whose safety I guaranteed in exchange for assistance. Breaking those guarantees would be... He paused, choosing words carefully. Counterproductive to everyone's interests. Your immunity agreement requires full cooperation. My immunity agreement requires testimony sufficient to prosecute my direct organization. It doesn't extend to diplomatic personnel, whose only crime was accepting protection I offered. Jihan's voice stayed level, despite the threat implicit in Webb's posture. Push this issue, and I'll reconsider the entire arrangement. Nyala watched the standoff develop with growing unease. She'd reviewed the immunity agreement a dozen times. Webb was technically correct that it required full cooperation. But Jihan had found the one gray area that would force a diplomatic crisis if pressed. Marcus. She spoke before the situation could escalate further, He's provided enough for 36 indictments already. The diplomatic connections can be pursued through other channels. Your objectivity is compromised, Agent Ashanti. Webb's eyes cut toward her with barely contained anger. I'm beginning to think this entire arrangement was a mistake. What I think is a mistake is threatening our key witness over information we can obtain through standard diplomatic pressure. Nyala kept her voice calm, despite her racing pulse. We need his testimony on the primary targets. Everything else is secondary. Webb looked like he wanted to argue, but one of the stenographers cleared her throat pointedly. A reminder that everything being said was entering the official record. He stood abruptly, gathering files with sharp, angry movements. We're done for today. I'll consult with Director Verne about how to proceed. His eyes locked on Nyala with unmistakable warning. I suggest you remember which side you're on, Agent, because right now it's not clear. The door closed behind him with enough force to rattle the frame. The stenographers packed their equipment in uncomfortable silence and followed, leaving Nyala and Jihan alone in the space that suddenly felt too small. You didn't have to do that, Jihan said quietly. Defending me will only make your position worse. I was defending the operation, not you. Were you? He turned to face her fully, and the careful distance from earlier had cracked enough to show something raw beneath. Because from where I sat, it looked like you believed I had valid reasons for protecting diplomatic contacts. Like you understood that some promises matter more than cooperation agreements. Nyala wanted to deny it. Wanted to reassert that she was simply protecting the integrity of the investigation. But she'd spent years reading people, and she couldn't lie to herself about what she'd seen during the questioning. Jihan had been completely cooperative until Webb pressed about diplomatic personnel. The shift had been immediate and absolute, a line he wouldn't cross regardless of consequences. That kind of loyalty was rare in her experience. Criminals typically traded information for better deals without hesitation. The fact that Jihan refused suggested something about his character that her training insisted she should ignore. Why? She asked instead. Why protect them when cooperation would guarantee your immunity? Because I gave my word. And because, unlike your agency seems to believe, not everything I've built is criminal enterprise. He moved closer, the handcuffs pulling her with him, until they stood inches apart. Some of those diplomatic connections represent my mother's family. People who helped a scared 12-year-old boy after his parents were murdered. People who gave me shelter and resources and asked nothing in return except that I remember my roots. Understanding crashed over Nyala like cold water. The diplomatic immunity, that's not about protecting yourself, it's about protecting them. Clever agent. His smile held no humor. I orchestrated this entire arrangement, the marriage, the immunity deal, the testimony, to expose corruption in both our organizations while keeping my mother's family safely removed from the fallout. But your handler wants to burn everything down regardless of collateral damage. Because that's his job, to get complete testimony and dismantle criminal operations. And your job? What is that exactly, Nyala? He lifted their joined wrists between them. Because right now, you're caught between following orders that destroy innocent people and protecting a criminal who maybe isn't quite what you thought. The question hung between them like a blade. Nyala's entire career had been built on absolute conviction that the law mattered, that justice was worth any personal cost. But watching Jihan refuse to compromise his mother's family even to save himself suggested that her black and white worldview might have more gray areas than she'd acknowledged. I don't know, she admitted, the words feeling like failure. I thought I knew exactly who I was and what I stood for. But nothing about this situation fits the categories I've used to make sense of the world. Welcome to my entire existence. Jihan's free hand came up to cup her face with the same gentleness he'd shown the previous night. The space between what we're supposed to be and who we actually are, that's where real people live, Nyala. Not in categories or moral absolutes, but in the messy, complicated middle where every choice costs something. His thumb traced her cheekbone, and she found herself leaning into the touch, despite every professional instinct screaming warnings. This was exactly what Webb feared. Her objectivity compromised, her judgment clouded by proximity and unexpected connection with her target. Except Jihan didn't feel like a target anymore. He felt like someone who understood the impossible weight of purpose built from pain. Someone who'd made different choices but recognized the same fundamental drive that fueled her own relentless pursuit of justice. "This is a mistake," she whispered, but she didn't pull away. "Probably." His other hand joined the first, framing her face with a tenderness that made her chest ache. "But I'm tired of pretending I don't feel this. Whatever this is between us, it started long before handcuffs and wedding ceremonies. You felt it too, didn't you? Every time you got close to catching me, every time I managed to stay one step ahead. We've been circling each other for years, Nyala. This was always inevitable." She should deny it, should remind him about professional boundaries and the fundamental reality of their opposing positions. But his words resonated with a truth she'd been suppressing since the moment he'd first looked at her in the embassy chapel. She'd spent 2 years hunting Jihan Yeo, had memorized his patterns, anticipated his moves, built psychological profiles attempting to predict his behavior. And through it all, some part of her had been drawn to him in ways that had nothing to do with the investigation. The intelligence that matched her own, the ruthless efficiency that mirrored her dedication, the capacity for loyalty that her research suggested shouldn't exist in someone running a criminal organization. "I can't," she managed, though her body leaned toward his despite the words. "I can't be this person. I can't betray everything I've built because of what? Connection? Understanding? The first genuine human warmth either of us has felt in years?" His forehead came to rest against hers, their breath mingling in the small space between. "I'm not asking you to betray anything, Nyala. I'm asking you to see that maybe the world isn't as simple as the FBI wants you to believe." His lips were so close she could feel their movement forming words. The handcuffs between them felt less like restraints, and more like the only thing tethering her to sanity, as every carefully constructed boundary dissolved in the face of want she'd suppressed for far too long. "Tell me to stop," Jihan murmured, giving her the same choice he'd offered the previous night. "Tell me this isn't what you want, and I'll step back. We'll maintain perfect professional distance for the rest of this operation." She should tell him to stop, should reclaim the control that had defined her entire career. But the words wouldn't form, trapped behind desire and fear and the terrible recognition that she'd already fallen too far to recover. So instead, she closed the final distance between them and pressed her lips to his in a kiss that tasted like surrender and defiance in equal measure. Jihan's response was immediate, his hands tangling in her hair, his body pressing against hers until they were flush from chest to hip. The kiss deepened with desperate hunger that suggested he'd been holding back as long as she had. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his eyes held something that looked dangerously close to triumph. "Well, I suppose that answers the question of professional distance." "This changes nothing," Nyala said, but even she could hear how hollow the words sounded. Come morning, we'll still be here, still handcuffed together in this beautiful prison, still caught between duty and desire." He kissed her again, softer this time. "But right now, in this moment, can we just be two people who understand each other? No agents, no criminals, just Nyala and Jihan." It was the most dangerous thing he could have offered. Not seduction or manipulation, but simple authenticity. The chance to exist outside the roles that defined them, even if only for a few stolen hours. She should refuse, should reassert boundaries and call Marcus back to establish additional security protocols that prevented exactly this kind of compromise. But Jihan's hands were warm against her face, and his eyes held vulnerability that matched her own. And she was so tired of being alone in her carefully constructed fortress. "Just tonight," she heard herself say. "Tomorrow we go back to being who we're supposed to be. Of course. His smile suggested he knew as well as she did that tomorrow would bring complications neither could fully anticipate. Whatever you need, Nyala, I'm yours. The words hung between them like a vow more binding than the ones they'd spoken in the embassy chapel. And as he kissed her again and pulled her toward the bedroom, Nyala felt the last of her carefully maintained distance crumble into something she couldn't quite name, but knew would change everything. Chapter 4. Nyala woke tangled in sheets and regret. Pale morning light filtered through blinds she didn't remember closing, painting everything in shades of gray that matched her emotional state. Jihan's arm was draped across her waist, their bodies fitted together with the ease of long familiarity, rather than a single night of reckless abandon. She'd crossed every line, betrayed every principle that defined her career, made love to the man she was supposed to be guarding, with a desperation that still made her skin burn with the memory of his touch. Stop thinking so loudly. Jihan's voice rumbled against her shoulder blade, sleep rough and entirely too satisfied. I can feel your regret from here. We shouldn't have, but we did. He pressed a kiss to her shoulder that felt too casual, too comfortable. And now you're spiraling into professional catastrophe, wondering how Webb will react when he inevitably realizes what happened, planning damage control strategies. He wasn't wrong. Nyala's mind had been cataloging consequences since consciousness returned. Webb's inevitable report to the director, the end of her career, potential criminal charges for compromising an active operation. Everything she'd built for years, destroyed by one night of weakness. Except it hadn't felt like weakness. It had felt like the first genuine connection she'd experienced since Wamboy's death, like finding someone who understood the specific shape of her grief and didn't flinch from its sharp edges, which was exactly the kind of thinking that ended careers. I need to call the director, she said, extracting herself from his embrace with clinical efficiency. Report the situation before Webb does. And tell her what exactly? That you slept with your witness? That your objectivity is compromised beyond recovery? Jihan sat up, the sheets pooling around his waist in ways that made it difficult to maintain professional focus. That will end exactly as well as you're imagining. Better she hears it from me than reads it in Webb's incident report. Or... He caught her wrist before she could reach for her phone on the nightstand. The handcuffs gleamed in morning light, a reminder that they were still connected in every practical sense. We could acknowledge that what happened was between two consenting adults in an impossible situation, and that it doesn't change the operational parameters. It changes everything. Nyala pulled against his grip without real force. I'm supposed to be guarding you, ensuring your cooperation and safety. Instead, I formed a human connection with someone who happens to be on the other side of an artificial divide. His thumb traced patterns on her inner wrist that made her pulse jump. The FBI wants to pretend we're categories rather than people, Nyala. But you're not a category, and neither am I. What happened last night was real. The first real thing either of us has experienced in years. The words resonated with dangerous truth. But truth didn't change protocol or prevent consequences. You don't understand how the agency works. Personal involvement with a witness compromises. Her phone buzzed before she could finish. Director Vern's name flashed across the screen with the kind of timing that suggested the universe had a cruel sense of humor. Agent Ashanti. The director's voice carried its usual clipped efficiency. I need you at headquarters within the hour. Agent Webb has raised concerns about operational security that require immediate review. Nyala's stomach dropped. Director, I should explain. Save it for the briefing. Bring Mr. Yeo. We'll conduct the meeting in a secure conference room. The line went dead before Nyala could formulate a response. Jihan watched her with unreadable eyes. So, Webb has already filed his report. Looks like it. She climbed from the bed and began gathering clothes with mechanical precision. Which means I'm about to get reassigned at best, fired at worst. Your security arrangements will change, probably shift to a federal facility with actual protocol compliance. And us? The question stopped her mid-motion. There is no us. There can't be. Can't there? He stood, moving with the same fluid grace that had drawn her attention in every surveillance photo. Last night you said this changed nothing, but we both know that was a lie. Everything has changed, Nyala. The only question is whether we pretend otherwise or admit what's happening. What's happening is a tactical compromise that destroyed my career. The words came out sharper than intended, edged with frustration directed more at herself than him. I made a mistake. One night of weakness that undid years of work. That's all this is. His expression shuttered closed, vulnerability replaced by the same calculated distance she'd seen during testimony sessions. I see. Well, thank you for clarifying your position, Agent Ashanti. I'll be sure to maintain appropriate professional boundaries going forward. The formal address felt like a slap. Nyala told herself it was better this way. Clean break, clear boundaries reestablished. But the part of her that had spent the night wrapped in his arms ached with something that felt uncomfortably close to loss. They dressed in heavy silence, the handcuffs requiring coordination that neither acknowledged. When the FBI transport arrived 20 minutes later, they climbed into the vehicle like strangers forced to share space rather than two people who'd memorized each other's bodies in darkness. FBI headquarters loomed gray and imposing against a cloudless sky. Nyala had walked these halls hundreds of times, but never with the sick certainty that she was about to watch her career implode. Webb met them at security, his expression confirming her worst fears. Director Verne is waiting, conference room 7. He didn't look at Jihan, focusing all his attention on Nyala with clear disappointment. I told you to maintain objectivity. Agent Webb, save it for the director. He turned and led them through security checkpoints toward the executive level. Other agents stared as they passed, their expressions ranging from curious to openly hostile. Word had clearly spread about the operation's complications. Director Callista Verne sat at the head of a long conference table, her silver hair pulled into its signature bun, and her dark eyes missing nothing as Nyala and Jihan entered. Two other figures occupied seats along the table, Assistant Director Chen from Internal Affairs, and someone Nyala didn't recognize wearing an expensive suit that screamed high-level legal representation. Agent Ashanti, Mr. Yeo, please sit. The director's tone gave away nothing. We have significant developments regarding your immunity agreement and the ongoing testimony documentation. Nyala's pulse hammered against her throat as she and Jihan took seats across from the legal team. Webb positioned himself near the door, like a guard preventing escape. The handcuffs clinked against the table surface when she tried to adjust her position. Let me be direct, the director continued, pulling a file from the stack in front of her. Agent Webb filed a report this morning, expressing concerns about operational security and potential witness tampering. He believes your objectivity has been compromised and recommends immediate reassignment. Director Verne, if I could explain. I'm not finished. The director's voice cut through Nyala's attempt at defense with surgical precision. In parallel, Korean diplomatic representatives have filed formal protests about Mr. Yeo's immunity agreement, claiming procedural violations invalidate the arrangement. They're demanding his immediate extradition to face charges in Seoul. Jihan's hand found Nyala's beneath the table, fingers threading through hers with pressure that suggested his calm exterior masked significant tension. On what grounds? On the grounds that the marriage ceremony was conducted under duress and without proper diplomatic authorization. The unknown lawyer spoke for the first time, her voice carrying the cultured accent of expensive education. Additionally, they're claiming that your testimony constitutes a violation of diplomatic privilege since several individuals you've implicated hold official status. Which is exactly what I warned about yesterday, Jihan said, his tone carefully neutral, despite the pressure of his grip on Nyala's hand. The diplomatic connections aren't just business associates. They're family members with legitimate government positions. Family members you failed to disclose during immunity negotiations. Assistant Director Chen's expression was granite hard. That omission constitutes fraud, Mr. Yeo. It voids your entire agreement. It constitutes protection of innocent parties from overreach. Jihan leaned forward, and Nyala felt the shift in his energy, from witness to adversary in the whole span of a heartbeat. I've provided testimony on my direct organization. Names, dates, locations, financial records, everything required under the immunity agreement. What I won't do is destroy my mother's family to satisfy your agency's hunger for career-making arrests. Your mother's family participated in covering criminal operations. My mother's family provided cultural connections and business introductions, which is standard practice in Korean diplomatic circles. The fact that I later used those connections for other purposes doesn't implicate them in criminal activity. His voice stayed level, but Nyala could feel fury radiating through their joined hands. Unless your agency wants to argue that every diplomat who ever made an introduction is criminally liable for how those relationships develop. The lawyer's expression suggested Jihan had just scored a point in a game Nyala was struggling to follow. My firm represents several of the diplomatic personnel Mr. Yeo is refusing to name. We're prepared to file formal complaints with the State Department if the FBI continues to pursue testimony that violates diplomatic immunity. So everyone in this room is protecting their own interests? The director said, her tone dry as desert sand. The Koreans want Mr. Yeo extradited. His lawyers want to prevent further testimony. Agent Webb wants operational security restored. And Agent Ashanti. Her eyes cut toward Nyala with uncomfortable precision. What do you want, Agent Ashanti? The question felt like a trap with no safe answer. Admitting she wanted to protect Jihan would confirm Webb's concerns about compromised objectivity. Claiming she wanted to follow protocol would be an obvious lie after everything that had happened. I want justice, she said finally, choosing truth over tactics. Real justice, not political maneuvering. Mr. Yeo has provided testimony that will dismantle major trafficking operations and expose corruption in multiple agencies. That was the goal of this operation. Whether he names his mother's relatives seems secondary to achieving the primary objective. Secondary? Webb's voice rose with barely contained anger. Those diplomatic connections provided cover for years of criminal activity. They provided introductions to legitimate business contacts. What Mr. Yeo did with those contacts afterwards is his responsibility, not theirs. Nyala kept her voice calm despite her racing pulse. Unless we're now prosecuting people for being related to criminals, which would make the FBI's job significantly easier, but completely undermine actual justice. Silence fell across the conference room. Director Vern's expression was unreadable, but something that might have been approval flickered in her eyes before professional distance reasserted itself. Agent Ashanti raises valid concerns, the lawyer said, clearly sensing an opening. The FBI's evidence against my clients is circumstantial at best. Mr. Yeo's refusal to provide testimony against them isn't obstruction. It's protection of individuals who have diplomatic immunity and no direct involvement in criminal operations. Convenient argument from someone being paid to make it, Chen said. But it doesn't address the extradition request or the legitimacy of the immunity agreement itself. Actually, it does. The director pulled another file from her stack, this one significantly thicker. I've spent the morning reviewing the original immunity negotiation transcripts. At no point did we require Mr. Yeo to testify against diplomatic personnel. The agreement specifies cooperation regarding his direct organization and operations. Family members with separate government positions don't meet that criteria. Webb's expression suggested he'd just taken a direct hit. Director, with respect. What I'm saying, Agent Webb, is that Mr. Yeo has fulfilled his cooperation requirements. The fact that you want more doesn't change the legal parameters of the agreement. She closed the file with deliberate care. As for the extradition request, the marriage ceremony was conducted under proper diplomatic protocols, with State Department oversight. Korean officials can protest all they want, but the immunity stands. The lawyer's smile was small but satisfied. So we're done here? Not quite. The director's attention shifted back to Nyala, with uncomfortable focus. Agent Webb's concerns about compromised objectivity remain valid. Agent Ashanti, I'm removing you from witness security duty effective immediately. The words landed like physical blows despite Nyala having anticipated them. Beside her, Jihan's grip on her hand tightened to the point of pain. Director, she started. You'll be reassigned to case documentation and testimony review. Agent Webb will assume primary responsibility for Mr. Yeo's security arrangements through trial. The director's tone brooked no argument. The handcuffs will be removed, and Mr. Yeo will be transferred to a federal facility with appropriate security protocols. No. Jihan's voice cut through the room with unexpected force. The immunity agreement specifies that Agent Ashanti remains my primary contact through trial proceedings. Change that parameter, and I withdraw my cooperation. Every person in the room turned to stare at him. The director's expression cycled through surprise to calculation in the space of a heartbeat. Mr. Yeo, that's not... Check the agreement. Section 7, paragraph 3. I insisted on that clause specifically because Agent Ashanti was the only agent I trusted to honor both the letter and spirit of our arrangement. His eyes locked on the director with absolute certainty. You want my testimony? She stays assigned to my security. Non-negotiable. Webb made a sound of disgust. This is exactly the kind of manipulation I warned about. He's using the agreement to maintain inappropriate contact. He's using the agreement as written. The lawyer's tone suggested she was enjoying this development immensely. If the FBI wants to void that clause, they void the entire immunity arrangement, which means Mr. Yeo walks free, and you lose every piece of testimony he's provided. The director's jaw tightened fractionally, the only sign of frustration in an otherwise perfectly controlled expression. Mr. Yeo, you're putting Agent Ashanti in an impossible position. I'm ensuring her career doesn't end because she was assigned to an operation with no clean solutions. He finally released Nyala's hand, but his eyes stayed locked on the director. You can reprimand her for compromised objectivity, or you can acknowledge that this entire situation was designed to be impossible, and she handled it better than most agents would have. But you don't get to destroy her career because I made it clear that she's the only agent I'll work with. Nyala's throat constricted around words that wouldn't form. He was protecting her, using the one leverage he had to prevent exactly the consequences she'd been spiraling about all morning. It was manipulation and sacrifice in equal measure, and she couldn't begin to process what it meant. This is inappropriate on multiple levels, Webb said, but his conviction had weakened. Director, you can't seriously consider... What I'm considering, Agent Webb, is how to complete this operation with the resources available. The director's eyes moved between Nyala and Jihan with uncomfortable assessment. Mr. Yeo has fulfilled his testimony requirements. The trial is scheduled for 3 months from now. Until then, he remains in protective custody with Agent Ashanti as primary security contact, per the immunity agreement. And the objectivity concerns? Chen asked. Are noted in the record but deemed secondary to operational success. The director stood, signaling the meeting's end. Agent Ashanti will submit daily reports. Mr. Yeo will maintain cooperation with testimony documentation. And Agent Webb... Her attention cut toward Nyala's handler with steel beneath professional courtesy. You'll focus on trial preparation rather than operational oversight you no longer have authority over. Webb looked like he wanted to argue further, but years of experience with the director's tone kept him silent. He nodded once, sharply, and left the conference room with enough force that the door rattled in its frame. The lawyer gathered her files with the satisfied air of someone who'd won more than expected. My clients appreciate the FBI's reasonable approach. We'll withdraw the diplomatic protests and provide additional cooperation where appropriate. After she left with Assistant Director Chen, only Nyala, Jihan, and Director Werner remained. The silence stretched uncomfortable and heavy until the director spoke again. That was quite a performance, Mr. Yeo. It was the truth, Director. I won't work with anyone else. His tone had lost its confrontational edge, replaced by something closer to respect. Agent Ashanti has been fair when she could have been vindictive. Professional when I gave her every reason not to be. Whatever personal complications have developed, she's never compromised the investigation's integrity. And yet personal complications have developed. The director's eyes moved to Nyala, with the kind of assessment that missed nothing. I'm trusting you to manage this situation, Agent Ashanti. Complete the operation, get through the trial, and maintain enough professional distance that I don't have to defend this decision to internal affairs every week. Can you do that? Could she? Nyala had no idea. But the alternative was watching her career implode while Jihan was transferred to federal custody, where Webb would ensure every moment was maximally uncomfortable as revenge for the morning's embarrassment. Yes, ma'am, she said, injecting more confidence into her voice than she felt. Good. Because if this situation deteriorates further, I won't be able to protect either of you from the consequences. The director paused at the door. One more thing. The marriage is legally binding until you file for dissolution. Be careful about that timing, Agent Ashanti. Divorcing your witness before trial could be interpreted as abandonment of security responsibilities. The door closed behind her, leaving Nyala and Jihan alone in the conference room. The handcuffs still connected their wrists, a physical reminder of how thoroughly they'd become entangled. You shouldn't have done that, Nyala said quietly. Use the agreement to protect me. Now we're stuck in this situation with no clean exit. I know. He turned to face her fully, and the vulnerability from the previous night was back in his eyes. But watching them destroy you for doing an impossible job well wasn't an option. Whatever happens next, at least we face it together. Together? We're not together, Jihan. We can't be. Can't we? He stood, pulling her up with him through their connected wrists. We're married, Nyala. Handcuffed together both literally and legally. Bound by an immunity agreement that neither of us can escape without destroying everything we've built. If that's not together, I don't know what is. She wanted to argue, wanted to reassert professional boundaries and emotional distance. But his words resonated with truth she couldn't deny. They were together, bound by law and circumstance and a connection that terrified her with its intensity. This ends badly, she whispered. You know that, right? There's no version of this story where we both walk away unscathed. Maybe not. His free hand came up to cup her face with familiar tenderness. But at least we'll have the 3 months until trial. 3 months to figure out what this is between us. 3 months to see if maybe, just maybe, there's a way forward that doesn't require either of us to sacrifice everything. You're an optimist. I'm a realist who happens to believe impossible. Things can work if both people want them badly enough. He pressed his forehead against hers. Tell me you don't want this, Nyala. Tell me last night was just a mistake you regret, and I'll maintain perfect professional distance until trial. But tell me the truth. The truth was that she'd fallen completely, that the man she was supposed to guard had become someone she couldn't imagine her life without, that 3 months felt simultaneously too long and nowhere near enough time to explore everything she felt. But admitting that would make real what she'd been trying to keep theoretical, would transform professional complications into personal catastrophe. I don't know what I want, she admitted instead. Everything about this situation is wrong. You're a criminal I helped arrest. I'm an agent compromising every principle I've built my career on. We're handcuffed together in the most literal sense, trapped by agreements neither of us can escape. And yet I've never felt more myself than when I'm with you. The words emerged raw and honest, stripped of professional distance. You see me, Jihan. Not the perfect agent or the grief-driven investigator, or the daughter who chose duty over family. Just me. Broken and complicated in trying to make sense of a world that took everything I loved. His smile was soft and devastatingly genuine. Same, Nyala. You see past the criminal and the orphan and the empire I built from ashes. You see who I actually am beneath all the careful construction. That's not something either of us can walk away from easily. So what do? We take it one day at a time. We complete your operation and get through my trial. We figure out if what we feel survives outside forced proximity and impossible circumstances. He kissed her gently. And we stop pretending this is simple, because nothing about us has ever been simple. She should protest, should remind him about protocols and professional boundaries. But his lips were warm against hers, and his words resonated with truth she was tired of denying. So instead, she kissed him back and let herself imagine, just for a moment, that maybe impossible things could work if both people wanted them badly enough. The conference room door opened without warning. Webb stood in the entrance, his expression cycling between disgust and vindication as he registered their embrace. Unbelievable, he said, voice dripping contempt. The director just defended your objectivity, and here you are proving me right about compromised judgment. Nyala pulled back from Jihan, but didn't release his hand. Agent Webb. Save it. I'll be filing an additional report documenting this incident. The director might have been willing to overlook your inappropriate relationship to save the operation, but internal affairs will want a full accounting when this all falls apart. He turned to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, Ashanti, I thought you were better than this. Guess I was. Wrong about you, too. The door closed behind him with finality that felt like a countdown timer starting. Nyala knew Webb would make good on his threat. Every future interaction would be documented, every moment analyzed for further evidence of compromised objectivity. The operation might be proceeding, but her career was effectively over the moment trial concluded. Jihan's thumb traced circles on her wrist where the handcuffs rested. I'm sorry. I keep making your life more complicated. No. She surprised herself with the certainty in her voice. You're the first thing in years that feels uncomplicated. Everything else, the investigation, the agency politics, the professional consequences, that's all complicated. But this? She squeezed his hand. This is the simplest thing in my life right now. Terrifying and impossible, but simple. Simple, he repeated, his smile returning. I like that. We're the simple part of an incredibly complex situation. Don't get used to it. We still have 3 months of protective custody, a trial that will expose everything we've built, and the very real possibility that you'll end up in prison despite the immunity agreement. Always so optimistic. I'm a realist. But she found herself smiling despite the weight of Webb's threat and the director's warnings. Come on, we need to get back to the safe house before anyone else catches us in compromising positions. They left FBI headquarters under the watchful eyes of agents who'd clearly heard about the morning's drama. The transport back to the safe house happened in silence, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. Jihan's fingers stayed threaded through hers, the handcuffs no longer feeling like restraints, but rather a physical reminder of how thoroughly their lives had become intertwined. Back at the safe house, afternoon sun painted the modern interior in warm tones that matched nothing about their situation's complexity. Nyala collapsed onto the sofa with exhaustion that had nothing to do with physical exertion. That was the longest morning of my life, she said. Jihan settled beside her, their joined wrists resting between them. Could have been worse. We could be planning your career funeral and my transfer to federal prison. Give it time. Webb will make sure both those things happen eventually. Maybe. Or maybe we surprise everyone by actually making this work. He shifted closer, eliminating the space between them. 3 months, Nyala. We have 3 months to figure out if this thing between us is real or just forced proximity creating false intimacy. 3 months to see if maybe there's a future where we're not on opposite sides. And if there isn't, then at least we'll know. At least we tried. His lips found hers in a kiss that tasted like promise and possibility. But I think we're going to surprise ourselves. I think we're going to find that impossible things work when both people refuse to give up. Nyala kissed him back and let herself believe, just for this moment, that maybe he was right. Chapter 5. The days blurred together in ways that should have felt monotonous, but instead created a rhythm Nyala found herself craving. Morning runs, where the handcuffs forced them into synchronized stride. Afternoons reviewing testimony documentation, where Jihan's casual brilliance made her reconsider every assumption about criminal psychology. Evenings cooking meals together in the safehouse kitchen, their movements coordinated by necessity and preference in equal measure. 2 weeks into the new arrangement, Nyala woke before dawn to find Jihan watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. What? She kept her voice quiet, despite them being the only occupants of the house. Just memorizing? His fingers traced her cheekbone with the kind of reverence usually reserved for precious artifacts. In case this all falls apart and I end up in federal prison after all. I want to remember exactly what you look like when you first wake up. Hair everywhere, guard down, actually peaceful for once. That's not going to happen. The immunity agreement holds. Does it? Because Webb has been building a case for prosecutorial misconduct that would void the entire arrangement. I've seen the documents he's requesting through his internal affairs contacts. Jihan's smile held no humor. He's remarkably thorough for someone motivated entirely by spite. Nyala's stomach dropped. How do you know about his IA requests? Because I still have connections inside multiple agencies, Nyala. You knew that when this operation started. The fact that I'm cooperating doesn't mean I've gone blind to threats. He shifted onto his back, pulling her against his side through their joined wrists. Webb is building a timeline of our relationship. Every compromising moment documented, every protocol violation catalogued. He's going to argue that our marriage was personal rather than operational from the beginning, which would make it fruit of a poisoned tree legally. That's insane. He approved the operation himself. He approved a tactical marriage, not... Jihan gestured vaguely at the bed they shared, the intimacy neither of them bothered pretending didn't exist anymore. Whatever this is, and he has enough evidence now to make his case compelling. Nyala forced herself to think tactically despite the fear threatening to overwhelm logical assessment. What kind of timeline? Security footage from the embassy showing how we looked at each other during the ceremony. Testimony from the officiator about body language suggesting prior relationship. Transcripts from the first night at the safe house where surveillance caught audio of us in bed together, though thankfully not anything explicit. His thumb traced patterns on her hip. He's interviewed every agent present during testimony sessions, documented every instance where you defended my positions, built a narrative that we've been involved since before the marriage, which makes everything we've done since then potentially criminal. But we weren't. We hadn't even met before the final negotiation session. Does the timeline support that? Because I've been following your cases for 3 years. You've been investigating me for even longer. There are documented instances where our paths nearly crossed. Seoul, Nairobi, that art gala where we both happened to attend but supposedly didn't meet. He paused, choosing words carefully. Webb is going to argue that those weren't coincidences, that we've been circling each other for years, building to this exact situation. The terrible thing was that he wasn't entirely wrong. Nyala had felt the pull toward Jihan's cases long before she could articulate why, had requested assignments that put her in proximity to his operations, had spent countless hours studying his patterns and psychology with an intensity that went beyond professional thoroughness. So what do? We get ahead of the narrative. We control the story before Webb does. Jihan sat up, pulling her with him through their connected wrists. You file for an annulment immediately, citing operational necessity rather than personal connection. We create documentation showing that everything since the wedding has been professional obligation rather than choice. We give them the narrative they want, forced proximity, creating false intimacy that we both regret. Each word felt like a small death. And if I don't want to do that? His expression softened. Then we accept that Webb will destroy both our lives to prove a point about inappropriate relationships. You'll face criminal charges for witness tampering. I'll lose my immunity and spend the next 30 years in federal prison. And whatever this is between us dies anyway, just messier and more publicly. There has to be another option. If there is, I haven't found it. He cupped her face with his free hand, thumb tracing her lips with devastating gentleness. I've run every scenario, Nyala. This is the only play that saves you. And saving you matters more than anything else. The words hung between them like a confession. Nyala's training insisted she should focus on operational logistics, the timing of the annulment, the documentation required, the narrative they'd need to present. But all she could think about was how empty the safehouse would feel without his presence beside her every moment. What happens to us? She whispered. There is no us. Not if we want to survive what's coming. Pain flickered behind his eyes, there and gone so fast she might have imagined it. We do what we have to do. Complete the operation, get through the trial, go our separate ways with careers and lives mostly intact. You're asking me to choose between my career and... I'm not asking you to choose anything. I'm telling you what the only survivable path looks like. His forehead came to rest against hers. Unless you think what we have is worth throwing away everything you've built? Worth criminal charges, and career destruction and years of fighting legal battles? Was it? Nyala's heart screamed yes with alarming intensity. But her rational mind, the part trained through years of tactical assessment, knew that love built in forced proximity rarely survived the harsh light of ordinary circumstances. They were handcuffed together in a pressure cooker situation that created false intimacy. What felt real now might dissolve the moment external constraints lifted. I don't know, she admitted. 2 weeks ago I knew exactly who I was and what mattered. Now everything is complicated. He finished her thought with a sad smile. Same. I've spent 15 years building an empire on absolute certainty, knowing exactly what I wanted and how to get it. Then you happened, and suddenly nothing is certain anymore. Terrible timing. The worst. But he kissed her anyway. Slow and sweet and tinged with goodbye. We have 6 weeks until trial. 6 weeks to prepare documentation, build our respective cases, present the narrative that this was all professional obligation. And in the meantime? In the meantime, we take what we can, store up memories for when we're back to being strangers on opposite sides. His hands tangled in her hair, pulling her closer. Make love like we're running out of time because we are. She should protest, should insist on starting professional distance immediately to build the timeline Webb would scrutinize. But Jihan's lips were on her neck, and his hands were working the shirt from her shoulders, and she was so tired of doing what she should instead of what she wanted. So she let him pull her back down into tangled sheets and morning light. Let herself memorize the way he touched her like she was precious. Let the world outside their handcuffed embrace fade into irrelevance for just a few stolen hours. Later, much later, they lay in comfortable silence while reality pressed back in with insistent weight. Nyala's phone buzzed with messages from Webb, status update requests that felt more like surveillance than security protocol. The trial prep documents waited on the dining table, a physical reminder that their borrowed time was running out fast. I need to ask you something, Jihan said, breaking the silence. And I need you to answer honestly, not tactically. Okay. If we'd met differently, at that art gala, in Nairobi, anywhere that wasn't you investigating me, do you think we would have ended up here anyway? The question felt dangerous in ways she couldn't quite articulate. I don't know. Maybe. We're too similar in all the worst ways, both driven by grief, both building entire identities around pain we haven't processed. That kind of recognizes its own. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have. She rolled onto her side to face him properly. We didn't meet differently, Jihan. We met exactly how we were always going to meet. Me hunting you. You orchestrating an impossible situation to serve your purposes. Everything after that is just consequences playing out. Consequences or choice? Does it matter? We're here now, facing decisions that will define the rest of our lives. She traced his jaw with fingers that trembled despite her attempts at control. In 6 weeks, you'll testify at trial. Your immunity will be official and you'll walk away free. And I'll file for annulment and return to work pretending none of this happened. And us? There is no us after that. There can't be. The words tasted like ashes. We'll be strangers who shared an intense situation. Nothing more. His eyes searched hers with uncomfortable intensity. You're lying. I'm being realistic. You're lying to both of us because the truth is terrifying. He sat up, forcing her to follow through their connected wrists. I fell for you, Nyala, completely. Not because of forced proximity or tactical manipulation, but because you're extraordinary. You're brilliant and broken and absolutely relentless in pursuit of what you believe is right. And I think you fell for me too, which terrifies you because it means questioning everything you've built your identity around. Stop. Why? Because it's true? His free hand caught her chin, forcing her to meet his eyes. We have 6 weeks before everything gets complicated. Why waste them pretending this isn't real? Because real doesn't survive what's coming. Real doesn't survive Webb's investigation and trial scrutiny and the fundamental reality that we're on opposite sides. Her voice broke despite attempts to keep it steady. I care about you, Jihan. More than I should, more than makes sense. But caring isn't enough when the entire world is structured to keep us apart. So we give up? Let Webb and the FBI and everyone else dictate what we're allowed to feel? We survive. We protect what we can and let go of what we can't. She pulled away from his touch, needing physical distance to maintain emotional control. That's all either of us has ever done. Survive and move forward. And if I don't want to just survive anymore? His voice had gone quiet, almost dangerous. What if I want to actually live for once? Want to choose something for myself rather than letting obligation and tragedy dictate every decision? The question hung between them like a challenge. Nyala wanted to answer that living sounded lovely, that choosing happiness over duty was a luxury she'd love to experience. But reality pressed in with insistent weight. Webb's investigation, the approaching trial, the career she'd built from her sister's ashes. She couldn't throw all of that away for 6 weeks of happiness that would likely crumble under external pressure anyway. Then you're braver than I am, she said finally, because I don't know how to choose anything except the mission. Something in Jihan's expression shuttered closed. I see. Well, at least we're clear on priorities. Jihan. No, you're right. This was always temporary. Forced. Proximity creating false connection. I let myself forget that for a moment, but you're being admirably professional about reminding me. He stood, pulling her up with him through the handcuffs. Let's get to work on trial preparation. The sooner we get through this, the sooner we can both return to our regularly scheduled lives. The dismissal stung more than it should. Nyala told herself it was better this way. Clean break starting now, rather than 6 weeks of building toward inevitable heartbreak. But watching Jihan retreat behind professional distance felt like losing something essential she hadn't fully appreciated until it was gone. They spent the day reviewing testimony documentation in heavy silence. The handcuffs felt more like restraints than connection. Forcing proximity neither of them wanted anymore. By evening, the tension had become suffocating. Nyala's phone rang with Director Verna's number, a welcome distraction from the emotional minefield their relationship had become. "Agent Ashanti." The director's voice carried urgency that immediately sharpened Nyala's focus. "We have a situation. Korean intelligence services just sent notification that they're planning an extraction operation to recover Mr. Yeo before trial. Details are sparse, but the threat assessment suggests they'll move within 48 hours. Ice flooded Nyala's veins. They're going to violate diplomatic immunity? They're going to claim the immunity agreement was fraudulent, which gives them legal cover for extraction. We're mobilizing additional security, but I need you both relocated immediately to a secure facility where we can control access." The director paused. "Pack essentials. Transport arrives in 20 minutes." The line went dead. Nyala turned to find Jihan watching her with the expression of someone who'd just heard their execution date announced. "They're coming for me," he said. "Not a question. The director is relocating us to a more secure facility. Additional protection until trial." She moved toward the bedroom, pulling him along through their joined wrists. "We need to pack, now." "Nyala." He caught her arm, stopping her frantic movement. "If Korean intelligence is staging an extraction, additional FBI security won't stop them. You know that. Then what do you suggest? We just wait here for them to break down the door? I suggest we run." His eyes held absolute certainty despite the insanity of the proposal. "Disappear before transport arrives. Use my connections to get out of the country, and somewhere the FBI and Korean intelligence can't easily follow." "That's insane. I'm an FBI agent. I can't just—" "You can if the alternative is watching me get dragged back to Seoul to face execution for crimes I didn't commit in a country that considers diplomatic immunity an inconvenient technicality." He pulled her close, urgency replacing the earlier distance. "I have resources, Nyala. Money, connections, safe houses across 3 continents. We can disappear completely, start over somewhere neither government can easily reach. And my career? My life? Would you prefer Webb's version? Criminal charges for witness tampering, career destroyed, and me dead in a Korean prison?" His hands framed her face with desperate intensity. "I'm offering you a choice, Nyala. Stay and let the systems we've built our lives around destroy both of us, or run and see if maybe there's something worth saving on the other side." Outside, engines approached, too early for FBI transport, moving too fast for standard security protocol. Jihan's expression shifted from urgent to alarmed. "Make a decision, right now, because those aren't your people coming." Nyala's training screamed to call for backup, to trust in FBI procedures and establish security protocols. But her instincts, honed through years of reading dangerous situations, insisted that Jihan was right. The approaching vehicles carried threat, not protection. She pulled her service weapon, moving toward the window to assess. 3 black SUVs with tinted windows, no plates visible. They stopped outside the perimeter fence with military precision, and armed figures in tactical gear began deploying toward the house. "Back door, now!" She grabbed Jihan's hand, already moving. "We're leaving." They burst through the safehouse rear exit into evening shadows, sprinting for the tree line that marked the property's back boundary. Behind them, the sound of breaching charges announced that whoever was attacking had just blown through the front door. Gunfire erupted, sharp cracks that sent adrenaline flooding through Nyala's system. She returned fire blind, providing cover while they crashed through undergrowth toward the service road she'd memorized during the first security sweep. "Car," Jihan gasped, pointing toward a sedan half hidden in trees. "I keep emergency vehicles stashed, part of having trust issues about government protection." They reached the car as shouts echoed from the safe house. Jihan fumbled keys from a magnetic holder beneath the bumper, his hands shaking with adrenaline. The engine caught on the first try, and they were moving before whoever was attacking could organize pursuit. "Where are we going?" Nyala kept her weapon ready, watching for tail vehicles. Airport. I have a plane on standby at a private facility. Always did, in case situations like this developed. He drove with focused intensity, taking turns that suggested intimate knowledge of back roads. We'll be in the air in 40 minutes, gone before anyone can organize a proper pursuit. And then what? We just disappear? Become fugitives running from two governments? We survive. His eyes met hers with fierce determination. We figure out the rest as we go. Nyala should argue, should call the director and report the attack and trust in FBI resources to provide actual protection. But the gunfire still echoed in her ears, and Jihan's hand was warm in hers. And somewhere, along the way, she'd started trusting him more than the systems she'd dedicated her life to serving. Okay, she heard herself say. Let's run. His smile was brilliant despite their circumstances. Together? Together. The word felt like a vow more binding than anything they'd spoken in the embassy chapel. As they raced toward the airport and an uncertain future, Nyala realized she'd just made a choice that would define the rest of her life. She'd chosen Jihan. Chosen possibility over protocol. Chosen to see if maybe impossible things could work when both people refused to give up. Whatever came next, at least they'd face it together. Did you feel the chemistry between Nyala and Jihan? That impossible pull between duty and desire that made you question everything you thought about right and wrong? Drop a comment below telling me what you think. Was Nyala right to run with Jihan? Or should she have trusted the FBI to protect them? I love hearing your thoughts. If this forbidden romance had you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button and subscribe with notifications on, because I have so many more intense emotional stories coming your way. Your support means everything and helps me keep creating these deep, passionate romances for you. Thank you for being here. See you in the next story.